to Professor.
Thank you, Sandy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is lecture number 9 in the collection of papers you have. And I would like to start by going back to the marginal bondholder and his arbitrage between the bond market and the gold market. I have not yet used the term Fullerton effect, but that's the official name for it. Could you write it? John Fullerton in 1844 published a book by the title The Regulations of Currencies. (1844). You probably know that there was a big debate in Britain at the time of Britain return to the gold standard. As you know, during the Napoleonic War, the Bank of England went off gold, suspended gold payments with the full concurrence of the British government. And when it was all over by 1815, Napoleon was defeated and peace was made, and the question came up that the country should return to the gold standard. There was a debate, as I suggested, and the two warring parties in this debate, it's a very acrimonious debate. One was called the currency school, and the other was called the, what was it called?
Banking school.
Banking school, thank you. The currency school and the banking school. And the controversy is still continuing. In fact, Mises fully subscribed to the theories of the currency school, and I find myself in opposition because I am a believer in the doctrines of the banking school. Now, Fullerton, John Fullerton, was one of the main protagonists of the banking school, and the idea, what we here in this course call the arbitrage of the marginal bondholder, was originated from his book, and it went into the literature, or went under the name Fullerton effect. And Fullerton effect simply said that if the interest rate is too low or pushed to a low level, then the public, the general public, will respond with stepped up gold hoarding. So we see at that time there was no refined concept of time preference, marginal time preference, and arbitrage, but the idea was there. All the idea which is involved in this important reaction of the public to an attempt by the government and the banking system to suppress the rate of interest shows up as gold hoarding. And Mises called it Deus ex machina, which literally means God out of the machine, but the idea is that it's an artificial and rather overstated explanation which covers up the truth. So to the mind of Mises, the marginal bondholder and his arbitrage was just Deus ex machina, an artificial and exaggerated explanation, because his idea was that there is no immediate response from the public. It was just the boom bust cycle, and ultimately the bust came, and that was the solution. That there was such a continuous adjustment through the rate of interest, and there was a countervailing force. The government was pushing interest rates down, and the banking system pushing it down, but there was a way for the public to fight back, given the gold coin. So, as I say, Fullerton was an early representative of this thought, and I just want to pay him homage, because this is the beginning of the whole theory which we are trying to develop here, the theory of interest, and as I say, John Fullerton is one of our heroes among many others. He's not the main hero. The main hero, of course, is Menger, the patron saint of our science of theory of interest. Now, what I want to talk about today is that of course, the government didn't stand by and just watch the public to get the gold, sell the bond, get the gold, hoard the gold, and so on. The government and the banks tried to block this movement. They tried what they could do to stop the general public to hoard gold, and they made it very clear that they considered gold hoarding a curse rather than market signal which should be obeyed. And this is our point of view. The gold hoarding is far from being a curse of the gold standard. It is one of the main excellence of the gold standard, namely the countervailing force, which then brings about the healthy level of interest, the natural level for the rate of interest, as some other authors called it, the natural level. So they did what they could. What could they do? They could discourage people at the bank window, the teller who was making payments to the customers. They could discourage the customers from demanding gold, and they could suggest that the paper money is just as good or even better, or they could simply say that, okay, if you want your gold, come back tomorrow. And when tomorrow came, they said, okay, sorry, it's a delay, come back tomorrow, and try to just deter these people who wanted gold coin. Another way of trying to discourage people to hoard gold is at the border. For instance, at the border they could set up bank branches right at the border crossing on the highway, and they would buy gold from those who came from other countries at a preferential rate. So that would give a little premium to the tourists or traders, whoever entered the country, because they could save shipping costs, or they would get a premium price and so on. And there were many others, and this is just something we have to accept without my going into any further details, that there was a resistance on the part of the government, on the part of the banking system, to pay out gold. And at the same time they started hoarding gold themselves. The banks and the central bank started to accumulate gold coins, slowly withdrawing it from circulation. So the question arises, would that actually deter the marginal bondholder? And more generally, the general desire of the public when the interest rate is being pushed down below marginal time preference, if gold coins are not readily available, would the general public say, well, so what? Sorry, well, we just have to do without. Well, of course not. The general public wanted present goods. Whenever the rate of interest is pushed below the marginal rate of time preference, the general public wants present goods. So that's actually going beyond demand for gold. Because if gold is not readily available, then the general public will look around and look for substitute. And silver could be a substitute, but of course silver got the same treatment at the hand of the government as gold did. So then what? Now this is something which I try to develop as an extension of the idea, because time preference is an elemental force. We know it's inbred, it's innate. Every one of us has this in our genes, and it's not such a simple thing that the government says, okay, withdraw gold coins and that's it. It's not as simple as that. It's much more complicated than that, and one has to study these consequences. So one consequence, and again, thanks to Karl Menger and his idea of marketability, this is what happens. The marginal gold bondholder now assumes another role, because it goes now beyond the simple bond gold arbitrage. It goes beyond that in the sense that people will start hoarding. If they cannot hoard gold, then they hoard the next best thing. If that is not readily available, then they just go on the scale and get other highly marketable goods and hoard them. So I'm trying to suggest to you that this is, shall we say, a global movement on the part of people. It's not just a question of bonds and golds. It's a question of fighting the government policy of suppressing interest rates with all available means. And all available means actually means that highly marketable goods will be in greater demand than they would otherwise be, because now these are consumable goods. Gold is not, or not so much. Gold is the least consumable good in the sense that basically the demand for gold as a consumption item is restricted to jewelry and dentistry and a few other art applications. Do we have gold on this monument here? It's real gold, is it?
Is it real gold?
I'm not sure if it's real gold, but I guess at least plated.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you in Toronto there is this Royal Bank building, and it's a glass skyscraper, and the windows are what's the word? Gold. There is
Coated.
Coated. Yeah, very thin. Very thin, and I think only gold can be used for coating in such a thin thing. And the idea is that in the wintertime it keeps out the cold because it reflects the heat back to the room, and in the summer it's the other way around. It keeps out the warm, and the air conditioning is so much more efficient. So that's another application of gold for consumption purposes, but these are really rather extreme. Gold is the commodity which is, shall we say, least consumable, or the gold does not lend itself to consumption because the demand, the monetary demand for gold is overwhelming. It goes way, way beyond the demand for gold in consumption. So that's another unique property of gold, which is important because, let me put it this way, when you hoard a consumable commodity, you are doing some harm, maybe not a very serious, but some harm to the consumer, because it means the consumer can still get it, but at a higher price. So hoarding anything other than gold has some kind of social cost. But gold is the one monetary commodity which is not going to have an adverse effect on society as a whole if it's being hoarded, or it has the least adverse effect on society of all the things. This is quite important. This is quite important because what this means is that the activity of the marginal bondholder in selling the bond and hoarding gold is not going to have any adverse effect on society. But now if the government comes and restricts the availability of gold for hoarding purposes, then the government does some damage to the social cause, because people will instinctively shift their hoarding demand away from gold. They have to, because the government forces them. They don't give up, but they will look for other things to hoard. And when they do hoard other marketable goods other than gold and silver, then this is going to have an adverse effect. Well, let's just look at some of these alternatives. What people could hoard would be, for example, salt, sugar, coffee, tea, spices, and similar goods. And hoarding these these highly marketable commodities would put some consumers at a disadvantage. So there are negative effects. But this is still marginal, because if somebody cannot buy coffee at such a low price, well, you can get used to, or whatever. That doesn't sound such a great problem. But I tell you what the great problem is, that the government restricts the availability of gold to people, to especially marginal consumer, and the marginal consumer, or more generally the public, who realizes that interest rates are being pushed down systematically by the government, they respond by hoarding market rules. What happens is that there is a flow of money, and huge amounts of money. So when talking about hoarding coffee, it's a ridiculous little example in comparison with because you have to take the whole spectrum of the economy, and hoarding will occur in every walk of life. Not just a housewife will do hoarding sugar. I haven't mentioned that, but that was a typical thing to do during World War II in Europe, hoarding sugar. Fantastic, because in the summer you could you could prepare your own preserves and use it for the winter, but you needed lots and lots of sugar for that, and other similar things, and so sugar was a prime example of something that was being hoarded. Tobacco was another. Alcohol may have. So anyhow, it's not these individual marketable goods, or highly marketable, but the whole sum, the sum of all these hoardings. And there was industrial hoarding too. Those who had cars, they hoarded tires, they hoarded motor oil. They couldn't hoard gasoline safely, so they hoarded motor oil, and then they hoarded brake fluid and this and that, which, carburetors, that was a big thing of hoarding in World War II. Car ownership was not very widely available, but those who did own cars, they got smart to it, and they hoarded carburetors. So all kinds of shortages developed. And as I say, you have to take the whole sum of these hoarding. Oh yeah, I meant to mention that, because that's important. Any enterprise, producing enterprise, can be described as having an input and having an output. And hoarding can occur at the input level, but it can also occur at the output level. And how is this achieved? Through leads and lags. Leads and lags. You could use lead at the input level, which means you are buying your input faster than you can use it in the production purpose, and hoard it. Okay, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be sugar, doesn't have to be silver. Whatever it is, you could, using leads. The word lead in this context means that you buy your input faster than you actually need it for the production. And the difference, the surplus, what you are buying, you are hoarding. But there's also hoarding, or could be, at the output level. And here it's lags, not leads, lags, because what you are producing, you can sell very fast, or you can sell more slowly. And if you are in the position that you can vary this rate of selling your output, then you could lag it and you would hoard your own output. Yes?
I think the biggest opportunity for hoarding is actually inside. So my wife works at Intel. When Intel buys its input as a 300 millimeter silicon wafer, and then it goes through, I think, a few hundred steps before it comes out the back of the factory as a chip. At each of those steps, they have a buffer of inventory waiting to go into the next tool. Now, Intel is practicing lean because we're in the deflationary side, and so they're trying to get rid of all those buffers of inventory. But there's literally hundreds of places where they can accumulate a buffer of inventory inside the enterprise.
So you basically agree with
Yeah,
that?
I'm adding to what you said, yes.
Yeah. It's a universal phenomenon. It's spread across the whole society. Consumers do hoarding, producers do hoarding, and distributors do hoarding. I remember very well, I was a child during World War II in Hungary, and I remember very well that wholesalers had a huge inventory, but they denied it. So if you, just an ordinary customer came in from the street asking for such and such, then they would say, sorry, out of stock. And that was it. But if a preferential customer came in, then the same good was available for a consideration. In other words, this preferential customer was willing to pay a premium price. And sometimes, of course, prices were regulated. There were maximum prices enforced by government agents, and they called it black market transactions when you charged more. But I remember very well that as a child we were just poking around in these wholesalers, and we saw a very rich warehouse inventory of things, anything, but they were not available for sale for the general public, so that was hoarding. Yes?
The best example is the German so-called Wirtschaftswunder, 1948, and when Ludwig Erhard introduced the German mark, and then they had a hard currency again. Overnight. The windows were full with where nobody knew that they were still there.
Previous day, empty shelves all over the country.
And then overnight. Next day.
So this gives you, this is excellent. This gives you an idea that the goods are there, but they are being hoarded, and the impression is that they are not available, period. But they are available, and they are being hoarded. And that could be so prevalent that it's almost incredible, the total effect, if the entire society, everybody, including children and old people and housewives and producers and businessmen, if everybody does this and they pick the marketable commodities and they hoard that, the total effect could be enormous. It really boggles the mind, because this is what I'm talking about. What happens is that rather than letting the marginal bondholder do his arbitrage, which will rectify the problem, a veritable flow, a river of money starts flowing out of the which market? Bond market. Where is it going?
Commodity.
To the commodity market. It's a flow. It's an irresistible flow which will sweep away everything. Now, wartime is one thing, peacetime is quite a different thing, but let's talk about peacetime. What happens here is that this flow continues. How far can it continue? Because we know that the goods exist, but they are in hiding, okay? Now, in wartime, the goods may not exist because they have been destroyed or production facilities. But we are talking about peacetime. Now, the flow continues, goes on and on, maybe for several years. And I'm suggesting that it's for several years, perhaps as long as a decade. And at the same time, the goods exist. They have been just removed from the market.